welcome to the Center for the Performing Arts. I'm Julia, and I'm the Director of Education and Community Engagement at the Center. Now, before I introduce you to tonight's presenter, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Center. We are located in Carmel, Indiana, just north of Indianapolis, and we have three beautiful venues on our campus. We have the Palladium, which is our concert hall. We have the Tarkington, which is our 500-seat proscenium arch theater, and we also have the Studio Theater. We're fortunate to have 6 wonderful resident companies, as well as presenting artists from all over the world. If you've not been to the Center, we sure hope you make it up there sometime soon. Now, tonight's program is called Car Front Seat, and it is sponsored by Car Global. We're very fortunate to have such wonderful sponsors associated with the Center. Car has been our sponsor of this program for quite a few years. And in a normal world, pre-pandemic, the way this program would work is we would invite students who had an interest in the genre that was being performed that evening to sit in on the sound check and then have Q&A with the artists, and then we would provide dinner and tickets to the show, typically high school and college students. And we do these with all genres: jazz, pop, rock, country, classical. It's really a wonderful program. But then, of course, the pandemic hit. We couldn't have live programs, so we decided to make these virtual. And the wonderful thing about that is our presenters can be anywhere in the world, including New York City. I want to tell you how to do the Q&A tonight. We have some theater students who will be asking questions, but we want you to be able to ask questions too. So if you're joining us on Zoom, down at the bottom, if you put your cursor over the bottom of the screen, you'll see a Q&A feature. Feel free anytime during tonight's program to type in a question, and as soon as the students ask theirs, we will get to those online questions. If you're joining us on Facebook, we're monitoring the chat as well there. So just post a comment and we will get to those as well. So with that being said, I want to tell you a little bit about our presenter tonight. Jane Pfitsch is a Broadway actor, singer, musician, and narrator. She's currently in the Broadway company of Dear Evan Hansen and previously performed on Broadway in Angels in America, Cabaret, Les Liaisons Dangereuses, and Company. She has also appeared in the national tour of Dear Evan Hansen and off-Broadway in Peer Gynt, Allegro, The 39 Steps, and Pump Girl. Her regional credits they're vast, including work at the Huntington Theater Company, Barrington Stage Company, the Old Globe, Williamstown Theater Festival, Arena Stage, McCarter Theater Center, San Jose Repertory Theater, Cincinnati Playhouse in the Park, Actors Theater of Louisville, Alley Theater, Shakespeare Theater of New York City, Capitol Repertory Theater, and Virginia Stage Company. She has also appeared in the film 27 Dresses and on CBS's Elementary. Jane is also a multi-instrumentalist. Like, if the acting wasn't enough, she plays multiple instruments and she's a narrator doing audio recordings. So Jane, with that being said, why don't you join us tonight? There you are. Hi, Jane. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
We are so thrilled for you to be with us tonight and to talk to the students and to answer any questions those joining us online might have. Jane, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself before we call up the students?
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Julia. I really appreciate being here. It's really exciting. I grew up on a very small dairy farm in Wisconsin, and I did theater in high school, but that was kind of all the theater I was exposed to except for American Players Theater. Shout out to American Players Theater in Spring Green, Wisconsin, which is a primarily Shakespeare and classical theater that is outdoor 5 months of the year. And that is where I fell in love with theater, going and watching those plays every summer. And I also played instruments. So then I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I went to Vassar College. I knew I loved theater. I looked for a program that had a good theater department, a strong music department, and also a strong academic department. By the time I graduated, though, I knew I wanted to be an actor, and so I moved to New York City. I lived there for a year before I went to Brown University MFA acting program because I wanted to be an actor primarily in classical theater was my interest. However, after 1 year in that program, through a stars aligning luck moment, I got an audition for the Broadway revival of Company that happened in 2006, where all the actors were playing instruments. I booked that job and I left school to do that Broadway musical. And once I had a Broadway musical on my resume, I started getting a lot of auditions for musicals. So I was like, oh my goodness, I better learn how to sing. And I have done a combination of plays and musicals since then, as you heard in my resume, primarily regionally, but also off Broadway and on Broadway. And I'm really excited to be here and answer any questions that anybody might have.
Oh, that's wonderful. And so you also studied at the Royal Academy in London. Didn't you have dramatic art?
Yes, that was during college. Yeah. So that was a study abroad program for a semester in college. And that's really where I fell in love with Shakespeare and decided I wanted to be a classical actor.
Sure.
Ironically, I haven't actually done any Shakespeare professionally, even though my training was primarily in that. So that's what happens. You never quite know what you're going to get.
Well, if you're going to study Shakespeare, that's the place to study, right?
Yes, it was an amazing program and just an amazing city to be in and environment. We saw a ton of theater there. I'll never forget it. It was definitely the highlight of my college career.
Right. Well, I can't imagine. That's wonderful. So are you ready for some student questions? Speaking of
yes,
college.
That would be great.
All right. Well, our first up is Graceland, and Graceland is a ninth grader at Fishers High School in Fishers, Indiana. So Graceland, what's your question tonight for Jane?
Well, hello. My question for you is if you could tell your past self one thing, knowing where you are now, what would you tell her?
Oh, wow. That's an excellent question. I think that there were a lot of things that I didn't know, I didn't anticipate about being an actor, what the life was going to be like. And it's both, I would say, more rewarding, invigorating, and inspiring than I thought it was going to be. And also there's a lot more downtime in between jobs than I anticipated. When you're in school, when I was in high school, I only had 2 shows a year and I lived for those shows. And in the in-between time, I was just waiting for the show to happen again, the next show to happen. But then once I got into college, I was doing so much theater. In grad school, I was doing so much theater. It was just all the time. And I was always engaged and inspired and challenged. But then professionally, it doesn't work that way. At least it hasn't for me in my career. There are some times where I'll go from show to show, job to job without any time in between, but that is more rare than finishing a show, having time to find the next job. And then, it might be a few weeks, it might be a month, it might be 6 months. So, and that I think has been the hardest for me because those are the times when I am not as engaged and I'm not getting to practice and work in the way that I like to. So I think that if I were to give myself, my younger self, advice about starting this career, I would say, hang on to whatever other loves you have, be that painting or volunteering or cooking or writing or other things that you can choose to do, even if somebody else doesn't give you permission to do. I think that's one of the hard things about being an actor, is that you can obviously work and learn songs and learn monologues and work on your own. But for me, that's not the same as being engaged with a community of people. It's a collaborative art. And so you have to have, for the kind of that inspiring feeling to happen in me, I need the other people around me. And so I have done a number of different things over over the years, music was my primary other love, but because music became so enmeshed with my theater career, that wasn't something that I had that was just my own that I got to work on. That was something that I was always preparing for auditions with. It became more professional. So I think that just for sustainability, I would tell myself, you know, to keep up those other things, like I said, writing, volunteering, and ideally it's drawing on other parts of yourself, and it's teaching you other things, teaching you about the world, about history, about, other kinds of people, which will of course serve your acting work, but will also just give you a way that you can challenge yourself and grow, no matter whether you have a job or not. I think that's what I would say to my younger self.
Thank you.
Thank
That's
you.
a
Thanks for the
great
question.
question. Very insightful. I've never heard that question before. And Jane, you mentioned about, that community of people and being engaged with others. And I would assume for you and others, actors, this has been such a challenging time, not being able to be engaged.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like nothing I've ever experienced before in terms of that. I mean, because of course, like once you go to school and you make friends in a community of people, that even if you're not in a show at that given time, you have a whole community of people that are always talking about the next thing they want to work on, or the next, you're always able to dream. And I think that is the hardest thing for me right now, is that it's not just that I'm not working. I'm used to that, as in 15 years in the theater, I've had plenty of time where I wasn't working, but it's that theater doesn't really exist. No one's working. And that is, especially for something that I love so much and I believe is so good for the world, that's really hard that doesn't exist. I've also learned, I mean, these kinds of forums are amazing, that you can connect with people even if you're not in the same place. I never did Zoom before the pandemic. So, and now I feel like I just realized that the other day. I was like, oh my gosh, I never did Zoom before the pandemic. I feel like I've been doing it forever.
Right.
But for me, it's not the same as being in the room with people actually in the same room. Like, it's so good that we have it, and it does allow us to do things that you can't do when just because of geographics.
Right.
But I just really miss being in the room with other artists and with audience members. There's nothing like it.
Oh,
So it's really
I
hard.
completely agree. But yeah, thank goodness that we do have Zoom to
Oh my gosh.
facilitate conversations. And
Yeah. And
Yeah.
people are doing really exciting work on it too. People are
amazing.
making plays for Zoom, and
Right.
it's amazing and really exciting to watch.
Right. Okay, so we're going to get to our next student, and
Okay.
our next one is Mary, and Mary is a senior at a special school that's kind of a partnership between Indianapolis Public Schools and IUPUI, and Mary has done at least 15 musicals herself.
Oh
So Mary, can you go ahead and turn on your camera and unmute yourself so you can ask your question?
Hi.
Hi.
This is my game narrating question to ask. How long have you been doing narrating audiobooks?
So I primarily did the audiobooks that I did all in one chunk. Audible was engaged in a program where they were making audiobooks out of every book that's offered on Amazon. And so they were hiring a lot of external narrators, and I did those I'm guessing it was about 10 years ago that I did them all within the space of a year. The industry has really changed on that. At that point, I was going into Audible. Their studios are in New Jersey, so it's a short train ride away from New York City. And I was able to go in and work with a technician there to record the books in one of their studios. Now, a lot of narrators have their in-home studios and they edit their books themselves, which is not a skill that I have learned or mastered. So I haven't been doing as many recently, but though it was so interesting to do audiobooks, and I've loved audiobooks forever. So it was really fun to get to go to Audible and see how it's done. It was really fun.
Thanks for that question, Mary.
Mhm.
And it's so much fun to have theater students that have, that are doing shows themselves. So, okay, Mary, we're going to come back to you in a little bit and have you ask another question, okay?
Okay.
Next
Thank you,
up,
Mary.
bye-bye, Mary. Next up, we have Claire, and Claire's in 11th grade. She goes to Valparaiso High School. And Claire, I spent a lot of time in Valparaiso back in the 80s. I worked at a theater. I don't think it belongs or that it's there anymore, but it was the Bridgeview Dinner Theater. So I'm very familiar with Valparaiso, but that was back in the 80s. So what question, Claire, do you have for us?
Well, hi, Jane. It's
Hi,
awesome
Claire.
to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Super excited to be here. And my question is, so this is kind of a long-winded question, kind of has a couple in one.
Great.
Do you feel that it is necessary for an actor to attend college to be successful in this industry? Like, do you think it's worth the money or the debt? Do you think attending a conservatory is a better option? Or, because I know you obviously got your master's and went to a very prestigious school, and I was just wondering your thoughts.
Yes. I have a lot of thoughts on that. That's an excellent, excellent question. And I think that there isn't one answer. I think that everybody, I've met so many people with lots of different educational paths. I did Angels in America with a wonderful dancer who never went to college. He knew when he was done with high school that he wanted to be a dancer. He also knew that as a dancer, he needed to start as soon as possible because it's an athletic career and you only have so many years that you can do it. And he just started working right away. So he didn't do any training programs. He didn't go to college. And so he didn't have the debt, which was excellent. And he did he's one of the smartest, most well-educated men that I know, very, well-read and has done a lot of work on his own and was a very successful dancer. I wasn't ready for that when I was graduating. I didn't know that I wanted to be an actor. I knew that I loved it, but I didn't know anyone I didn't have any examples of professional actors in my life, of adults who were professional actors. So I went to college and decided not to go to a conservatory because I was still debating between music and theater. And at the time when I went to school, student debt was just about to be revealed as something that was maybe not that great to have. But at the time, it still was kind of like student debt, if you're going to have debt, is better than other kinds of debt. Then I went to 4 years of Vassar and I went to 1 year of the MFA program at Brown. I actually didn't end up getting my master's degree because I left to do company on Broadway. And I seriously considered going back, but my professors at Brown, I sat down with them after about 6 months of being gone, and I was debating whether or not I should come back. And actually, they did not accept me into the program the first time I applied. And they called me and they said, "We really like you. We really want to accept you into the program, but we don't have enough scholarship money to offer you this year. And we don't think it's wise for you to take out that much debt." But still, when they did accept me into the program and I had a very generous scholarship, I had to take out loan for living expenses. And so when I went back to speak with them about whether or not I should return, my very, very wise acting teacher, who also was part of running the program, said to me, "If you can get paid to learn how to do this instead of pay to learn how to do it, you should do that." Because having debt as an actor is incredibly hard to pay off. And that's primarily because you don't work consistently. It's not like other jobs where you get a job and you work it for 5 years, 50 or 52 weeks out of the year. That is just not how it works. You're lucky if you work 6 months out of the year. So paying off a substantial amount of debt is really hard. That being said, I also think that education is really great and important. And for me, college was a lot about not just learning about acting and learning about the theater, but learning about myself and meeting lots of really cool people who were doing lots of different kinds of things and were from different places, Like I said, I grew up in Southwest Wisconsin. A lot of people there had been there for generations, and that was wonderful, but I hadn't met a lot of diversity of people from a diversity of backgrounds. And I feel like as an artist, that's really important too. So I wish that I had, a cut and dried answer that was like, do this, don't do that. I know a lot of people who went to conservatory programs right out of high school and loved them and are very successful. Also, again, I wasn't really ready for that. I'm glad that I was able to take the diversity of classes that I took at Vassar. So I think that the most important thing is to know yourself. And whether that's, I know people who took a gap year and didn't go to college and didn't necessarily become an actor, but took a gap year and then went to college because they were more, they, worked for a year doing something else and learned about themselves that way and kind of what they wanted to do. I think the closest thing I would give to actual direction is that the financial climate being what it is in terms of education and loan, there are some programs that are free. And so you can research those. Like there's MFA programs. Yale is free now. There's a program in California that's free. There was one in Denver, but I think that's they had to close. So that's a great option. And there's scholarships and all of that available. But I think knowing what you want to learn personally, whether that's I want to learn musical theater and I have this really strong singing background, but I actually don't have that much of background in acting. So I'm going to go to a program that focuses on that, or the reverse, or I'm going to go to a program where I can do a double degree and I can also major in history, but I can do a lot of theater. Knowing yourself and what you're interested in is going to get you the most bang for your buck in terms of education. However, I also think that part of education is not knowing. So maybe what you know is that you don't know and you want to go to a place where you have a lot of options. Does that help? Do you have any follow-ups on that? Because I know that's kind of roundabout.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I think that's an excellent question, Claire, and one especially since you're a junior. I understand why you're asking that. And my degree's in theater, and as Jane said, I think I came from a very small town, and I learned so much about different styles of theater that I was never exposed to. Yes, I knew Broadway musicals, and I knew Bernard Shaw, but when you study theater in a university setting, you're exposed to so much more than you are, if you come from a small town, maybe don't have that many experiences. I would just throw out there, and I know our next student has recently got her master's in arts administration. And I wish I had double majored in theater and arts administration. I think that's a wonderful, partnership in education, if you decide to go on to college. So thank you, Claire. And with that being said, I'm going to call up Krista, our next person to join us. And as I mentioned, Krista has graduated. She's got an undergrad in theater and a master's in arts administration. And she also happens to now work at the center.
Yay.
Hey, Krista. Yay.
Hi, Jane. So leaning a little bit on my recent arts administration experience, I noticed that on your resume, you are a member of both the SAG union as well as the Actors Equity Union.
Yes.
And I was just wondering if maybe you have some tips for people just starting out, because it seems kind of like a circle of fire that to get your union credits, you have to work for a union theater. And yet if you haven't done those kinds of shows, so any suggestions on how to kind of like work your way and become a member of the union, because it feels like it's really important to have that representation when you're working as a professional.
Yeah. Great question. And it's complicated because with equity, I'm not as familiar with SAG. I haven't done nearly as much work in TV and film. But with equity, the way I got my equity card was I booked company. And then if you book a certain level of contract, you can buy yourself right into the union. without, I mean, you have to pay the initiation fee no matter what, but there's a point system where you can kind of accrue enough points. You can work in qualifying theaters enough time to accrue enough points to get your equity card, or you can book a job where you can just pay the initiation fee and join right away, which is what I did. The debate comes in that there are a lot, depending on the city you're in, there are a lot of theaters that are not equity theaters. And if you're an equity member, you can't work in those theaters. So when I was just starting out, there was a lot of debate around, should one join equity? Do you want to earn enough points? Because if you're a member of the union and you want a job in a non-qualifying or non-equity theater, you can't take it. And I know I have not worked in Chicago, but I know that that's more of an issue in Chicago, that there's some really great theater happening that is non-equity. And so I do know some Chicago actors who held off on getting their equity cards. I am a big union fan. I think that equity is great. I think that there are some times when I wish that the union had more power, but overall, the benefits, the salaries are better, like everything, it's designed to do that, right? To protect you as a worker, to help give you health insurance, you have a 401k, you have just a lot of things that you don't have working for a non-equity theater. Even things like breaks in rehearsal, equity has delineated breaks where you have to either have 5 minutes every hour where you take a break and you can go to the bathroom or get a drink of water, or you have 10 minutes every hour and a half. And they police that really, strictly. And it's really important. I've been in shows where that didn't happen and you start to really feel it. You're like, we're in costume, we're exhausted, we need to be able to sit down, you're wearing corsets and all this kind of stuff, and you need those breaks. And if you're in a non-equity house, that might happen. There are plenty of non-equity houses that run like equity houses, and they protect their actors as much as they can, but they can't pay the minimum salaries required, or things like that. But I would say that you also, as an equity member, you get access to the EPAs, which are the auditions that every theater equity show is required to have. Whereas as a non-equity member, you don't have access to those as much as you do if you're an equity member. So I would say join the union if you can. So then the question is, like, how can you join the union if you're having trouble accessing those rooms? And I know that it's a challenge. Non-equity members can go to the equity open calls. You don't get an audition unless there's slots available that aren't taken by equity members. But I know people who have gotten their cards that way, by going to those open calls, by standing in line and taking the open slots, and then by booking the job. It's a very hard to do, but you can do it. There also are some training programs. Brown was one of them, where you earn equity points. So Brown is a collaboration with the Trinity Rep Theater in Providence, Rhode Island. And so as a student, you work in the shows, and that earns you enough points to then get your equity card at the end of the program. I'm not sure that that was the case when I went there. I'm not sure that they're guaranteeing that anymore, but there are other programs that do that as well. And internship programs, summer stock programs are often places where you can earn some of those points towards a card. But I know that it's a challenge, but one that I would argue, is worth facing.
Great.
So if that helps.
Oh, that is awesome. Thank you so much for answering my question.
Of course. Thanks for coming.
Really interesting question. And Jane, once you have your equity card, is it yours for life? It is, isn't it?
Yes, you just have to pay dues. You pay yearly dues, no matter if you're working or not.
Mhm.
And then you also pay working dues. If you're working, you pay a percentage of your paycheck.
Okay. Well, we have some questions coming in on Facebook, so I think I'll ask you those, and we've got
Great.
about 15 minutes left, so we'll get those questions, and then we'll cycle around to the students again. And I want to remind folks that if you're joining us on the webinar, feel free to use that Q&A feature. Just put your cursor over the button or over the bottom of your screen, and you'll see the Q&A, and just type your question in there. And if you're on Facebook, just put it in the comments. So, and this is real small. I'm looking at my phone. So we have a question from Christian. And do you see post-pandemic smaller market cities showcasing live theater, not just fringe festivals, but more studio theater development as more artists leave bigger cities like New York City?
Wow, that's a great question.
Yeah.
That's a really good question. It's not something that I've thought about. But saying that I haven't been considering artists also leaving New York City, because I feel like I've just always been like, you got to be where the people are. But I think that that's actually really exciting, and I hope that that happens, because one of the things that I hope for post-pandemic theater to be different than it was before is in the affordability and accessibility of theater. And I think that if that geographic transition would aid in that. And I'm hoping that there are going to be smaller venues that are more accessible to lower income people.
Yeah. It's a really interesting question. A lot
Yeah.
to think about there too. And then we have another question. Rob wants to know, are you still in acting classes or taking voice lessons even when you're working full-time in a full-time show?
Yes. The answer is yes. I would say, especially for me, especially voice lessons, that's something that is pretty crucial. And always, because that wasn't my background, I was an instrumentalist first. And so, like I said, when I started doing musical theater, I was like, oh man, I sang in school, but I never considered myself a singer. So definitely voice lessons as much as possible.
Sure.
And acting classes, I think like that is harder. If it's a class, it's harder for it to be flexible and work around a work schedule. And sometimes also you're traveling for work, you're working regionally, you're on tour, all of that kind of stuff. Voice lessons you can still often do virtually on FaceTime or Skype or Zoom, but acting classes are a little bit harder, though I imagine that's also changing, is changing and will continue to change with all of the virtual stuff that's been happening. I know now you can do, like, if there's so many auditions are being put on tape that you can kind of be anywhere and put an audition on tape. And there are people who are doing coaching sessions where you do a coaching session with them online, and then they film your audition while you're doing the coaching session with them online, and then you have your audition done to send it to your agents. So there's I think that's all really changing, and it might mean that acting classes are more accessible no matter what your schedule is and where you're located.
Right, right. And talking about the auditions being recorded, we attend, myself and a couple colleagues, we come to New York every year this time for the big conference, the APAP conference, Association of Performing Arts Professionals. And we're seeing live performances, at any one time, there's like 30 going on. Well, that can't happen. So it all went online, and those were all recorded showcases. So
Yeah.
which, it's kind of nice because you're more flexible then, you're not racing around to try to see all these showcases. They're more leisurely that way.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
yeah. So we have some more questions coming in, actually. So let me ask you a couple of these before we get to go back to the students.
Okay.
These are coming in on Zoom. Sunny wants to know, is there anything you learned during a show's rehearsal or performance process that you wish you had already been taught in school?
Oh, wow. Yes. I would say, I think I learned something in every show, rehearsal, and performance. I think there are some things that my first job in a big theater outside of company was at the Alley Theater in Houston. And it was a great big theater without a mezzanine. So it was just one long incline of seats, and the back row was very far away and very high. And the rehearsal process was in a rehearsal hall. I wasn't prepared for the size of the theater, how to lift my head. I had to lift my head at what felt like a very artificial angle, and project a lot more than I was used to doing, because the only big theater I'd ever been in was in a musical and I had a microphone. So it's a kind of a different thing. And my director on that show was amazing and really taught me how to do it. And took the time during tech to teach me how to do it. And I felt like I managed to do it, but it's easier to learn those kinds of things that have to sink into your body when you have a little bit more time.
Yeah.
And so cramming for that kind of thing was really challenging. And that was the kind of thing that I was like, I wish I'd had experience in big theaters. I just didn't. In college and grad school, it was all small black boxes and things like that for when I was there. So those kinds of things, but it's hard to anticipate. Like I didn't know I'd be doing musical theater. A lot of my professional career has been comedy. I did almost no comedy in college and grad school. I considered myself very serious. I had funny friends. I was not one of the funny people in my mind. And then Company was a comedy, and I was this role that I was an understudy, but the role that I was seen in the most was Amy, the Crazy Bride, and it was comedy. And so suddenly I was this like musical theater comedian. That's what my resume said I was. And so I did all sorts of like clowning shows and farce like comedies that I just totally learned how to do on the job, which I would have liked to have had more experience in school, but I didn't know that that's what I was going to be doing. So
I think comedy is a scary thing to tackle. Singing is, musicals, but comedy, it's tough.
Yeah. It's really hard. It's
Yeah.
really hard. And I just never even considered that it was something that I could do. But fortunately, I remember when I was doing Company, and I remember John Doyle, who was the director of that show, basically teaching me about comedic timing and being, I think he understood that I was like, I don't know how to do comedy. This is crazy. And he said, it's just like straight theater. It's just like serious doing a drama, except with punctuation that tells the audience this is funny instead of it being serious. And that was fascinating and like a really good place to start in learning about how to do comedy. So
you had a great mentor.
Yes, I had an excellent mentor. Yeah.
Okay, we have several more questions to get to. And again, I want to get to the students real quick. So I'm going to ask you, I've got a couple here from Peg. She wants to know, how did you hear about the closure of Dear Evan Hansen in March? How did they let you know?
We had a company-wide phone call. It was right as it was all kind of coming down right at once. I maybe heard Governor Cuomo's announcement first, but then got an email right after that was like, this is the number to call in. And it was crazy. I mean, it was like everybody calling in, not just the actors, but the musicians and the crew and the administration, like everybody calling in. And our producer, they were getting the news just as we were getting. So at first we knew that we were going to be closed down for a month. It was March 12th, and they had closed till April 12th. But pretty quickly after that, we were getting updates that it was going to be a continued closure. So,
and here we are almost a year later.
I can't believe it. Yeah.
Well, let's go back to Graceland.
Okay, great.
If she has a second question for you. Graceland, do you have another question for Jane?
Yes.
Hello.
Hi. I said, what is the hardest character you've had to play and mentally connect to, and why was it so hard?
Oh, wow. That's a great question too. Well, they're all hard for different reasons. And I guess sometimes roles that I think might be thought of as harder I have some connection to it, so it makes sense to me. So maybe it isn't as hard for me. I would say that I would pick, oh, can I pick more than one?
Yeah.
I understudied the angel in Angels in America, which is this, otherworldly being that has really wild, dense text. And you don't quite know what she is or who she is, or if she's real or if she's in the main character's imagination, or, so that was hard to just wrap my mind around. In a way, she could then be anything. So, and I also understudied 2 brilliant women who played the angel, so I got to watch them do it, which helped me. I never performed it, but I worked on it in rehearsal, and watching them really helped me kind of find my way into it. But then on top of that, I think I would say that Heidi in Dear Evan Hansen, because I understudy both the moms. There's Cynthia and then Heidi, who is Evan's mom. And I connected easier to Cynthia and in her journey, but Heidi was harder for me to find. And I feel like I'm still working on finding her. And I would also say about both of those moms, I'm not a mom. And so while in order to play those women, I've spent a lot of time trying to imagine what it would be like. But I also am very sure that if I ever become a mom, I will understand that I had no idea how to play those parts. You know what I mean? Like that I feel now like I've found my way into them. It's been a long time since I've done them, but when the show closed down, I felt like I really, had found my way into them. But I also have an awareness that if I actually was a mother, that would change everything. And there's no way for me to be that when I'm not. So that's been a challenge.
Does the understudy, because I know that you a lot of the stuff that you've mentioned, you understudied in.
Mm-hmm.
Does that add an extra challenge to what you're learning? Because I know that it could be frustrating to learn this character and put so much effort into it and then not necessarily get to perform it.
Yes.
Any challenges?
Yeah, it's hard. You just named the things that are hard about it. It's very challenging to spend a lot of time and energy and love finding your way into work that then you don't necessarily get to do. It's wonderful. Like both Dear Evan Hansen, I performed both parts a lot, and that's great. In Angels in America, I did have my own track that I got to perform every night, which was wonderful and made all the difference. That was just an amazing, amazing show to be a part of. And if I hadn't got to be a part of it at all, and I was just sitting backstage, I think that would have been a lot more challenging. But I did get to be a part of it every night anyway. And then getting to work on the additional material was wonderful and exciting. But it is hard. It's hard if you don't get to do it. And it's also another challenge of being an understudy is that you have to understudy the person that you're understudying. So not just the role, but you have to be able to slide in to a slot created by another human being. And I've been very fortunate in that all the directors that I've worked with as an understudy have really encouraged the understudies to find their own version of the character. But you're sometimes coming in at a moment's notice. You haven't ever played the scenes with the cast members before. You've only rehearsed them with the other understudies. So you have to deliver a performance that isn't going to throw anybody else off their game, isn't going to make them, give them something that they're not expecting. Hopefully you could give them something they're not expecting in a good way that they could then respond to and enrich, be like, oh, that was different. And like they learn something for themselves, but you don't want to give them anything that's going to throw them off in front of a live audience when you don't get to rehearse it. So that I would say is the hardest thing, is to figure out how to make something your own and believable and authentic within this other person shaped, hole that you're trying to fill. And it's not just about how they play the character. It's also who they are in the company. I mean, that's one thing that was a challenge for me with Heidi, which is Evan's mom in Dear Evan Hansen, is that the woman I was understudying, both on tour and on Broadway, is a leader in the company. She is a mom. She has relationships with everybody. Everybody is drawn to her. She's a leader in the company. And so when she was gone and I came in, I also had relationships with everybody, but I was more often backstage and people didn't know me as well. And as an understudy, you kind of fold in on yourself a little bit to be able to sit backstage. And when you're in a show, you kind of have to expand and be big and be, larger than life, and doing that not just for the audience, but also for the cast members, and being able to fill that role. It's not something you really can do, but you try to do it. And that's, it's challenging. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Good questions.
That is a good question. Jane, we've reached the end of our time, but I think a couple of the students have another question. So could you stay just a little
Sure,
bit?
of course. Yeah.
Okay, we'll try to get to all those real quick. Maybe spend another 5 minutes or so and just maybe rapid fire. And students,
Perfect.
if you don't have a second question when I call on you, that's okay too. So next up, we're going to go back to Mary and see if Mary had a second question for Jane. Mary, do you have a second question? If not, it's okay.
Yes, I do actually. How did you transition from theater to TV and movies? And there's another parter. And how was it working with the real Raul Esparza?
Ah, Raul,
Raul
yes.
Esparza.
Well, so TV and film, I haven't done that much. I did one small role in a film and a small role on Elementary. So I wouldn't say that I've actually made that transition. I know some people who have, but it's I did the one film role that I did in the middle of when I was doing company, so that I had just started out in the professional world at all. And I was getting lots of auditions for theater and also for film and TV. And in fact, when I booked that part, I think that was my first film audition ever. And I remember thinking, when I left the audition, well, that didn't go very well, but I forgive myself because that's the first one I've ever done. And it's very different. Auditioning for film and TV is very different than auditioning for theater. And then I got the job and I was like, oh. But then I have had pretty soon after I did that job, there was a writer's strike in the television industry, which really diminished the number of parts that were available. And I stopped getting as many auditions when that happened. And then the recession happened in 2008, which also impacted the amount of work there was and how the auditions ended up flowing. And so I feel like over the years, I've had a handful of opportunities to audition for film and TV, which I get through my agents, but I don't have a lot of connections in that world. I do think it's a really different medium, and I would like to have more experience before I would consider myself really able to work well in that medium. But I haven't had nearly as many opportunities as I have for theater. But to answer the second part of your question about Raul Esparza, I loved working with Raul. He was he's an amazing performer, an amazing actor. He was just incredible in that part, but he also was really warm and welcoming to me. I was really young. I was really green. I was really scared. And I was on Broadway for my first professional job. And so I was really just kind of like a deer in headlights a little bit. And I think that he could see that, and he just said a few encouraging things to me along the way that made me realize that everybody was scared, that he was scared. You know, this was a big deal for him too. And it was a, you know, part that he'd been wanting to play, and in a show that was really, you know, critically acclaimed when it was out regionally and coming in on Broadway. There, he had a lot of pressure on him, and he really made me feel not alone. And that was huge for those early rehearsal days for me. So he will always hold a very soft spot in my heart.
Yeah, I'm glad that he did that. Like before he was working with you, I've been binge watching Law and Order SVU.
Yes.
Actually, and I'm so grateful that he's working for you. So,
Thank you, Mary.
Thanks,
Yeah, he's
Mary.
wonderful.
So.
Thank you, Mary.
Mhm.
Yeah, we're all doing a lot of binge watching these days.
Yeah.
Okay, Mary, if you want to go ahead and mute, we'll see if Claire has another question for us. Claire, do you have something?
Yes, I do. So my question is, so when you first get a role and you are like, okay, great, I got this role, how do you start preparing for that? Like an acting role, what's like typically the first thing you do? I know that's kind of another big question, but.
No, that's a great question. You know, it really depends. It depends on the part, and it depends on how much time you have in rehearsal. And it depends on the director. So I've worked with John Doyle quite a bit, who directed Company, and then I've done, I think, 4 other shows with him. And the preparation that I do if I'm doing a show with John is entirely about preparing the musical instruments, plural, that I usually am playing if I'm working with him, and not really preparing the script. He is very much about like working in the room in the moment, and wants you to come in kind of with a more open mind and being responsive to the other actors. I did a part in this wonderful play that I love called Educating Rita, which was directed by Mariah Aitken, who I also love. I had done the 39 Steps with her, which is a comedic farce-like show. And then we did this show, and it was a 2-hander, which means there are 2 actors in it. And we did not have a lot of time to rehearse. We had, I think, 3 weeks, maybe 3.5 weeks. So there was a lot of text and not a lot of time. And because I knew her she contacted me ahead of time, and she was like, if you can learn the lines, because there was a lot of text, that would be great. And I decided that for that role, I would try to learn the lines without making any character choices, because I didn't know that one other actor who I was going to be working with, and I wanted to be able to respond to him, but I wanted to obviously have the text learned. And also that play was about, my character was learning English literature, and there were all these books that were mentioned in the text that I hadn't read. And so I read all those books so that I could be reading the things that my character was reading. And that was, I think, my favorite prep for a show, because I came in with my mind kind of full of the world of the show, but without having made decisions about, here's how I'm going to say this line, here's who I think this character is. So then I could be really open to a lot of the stimuli you get once you get into the room, which is not just the director and the other actors you're working with. It's also like the costume. For that show, I had just these amazing costumes, which really impacted the way that I moved. So I felt incredibly prepared, but I didn't, sometimes I think if I do, for me, this is just me personally, I've learned that the best thing to do is to try to create a platform on which I can stand, but not think too much about how I'm standing or how my body's going to look. Because if I do that, then I'm less authentic and responsive in the moment. I'm more just showing you the homework that I did as opposed to really trying to be present. So I have to kind of create a world for myself without deciding who I am in that world, and then allow myself to respond to that world with then the new things that my collaborators are bringing. Does that make sense?
Yes, that is an awesome answer. Thank you so much.
Of course, it's a great question.
That was fascinating. Great question and wonderful response. I'm sitting here thinking, man, I wish when I was a theater student, I could have talked to you and gotten that kind of input. That was amazing. So I'm going to ask Krista if she has another question. I don't think she does, but Krista, do you have another question?
No, Jane has done such a wonderful job. She's already answered everything.
Oh,
Okay.
thank you.
Wonderful. Well, I just want to tell this before I bring them all on again. I just want to mention our next 2 car front seat opportunities we have coming up. On February 22nd, we have Maggie Paletti Stiggers, and she's a professional actress and a voiceover artist, and she's an award-winning comedy writer. But she also has a show right now on Netflix that not only does she write, she produces and she stars in. So I guess that would be like a triple threat. And that show is Theater School Dropout. It's kind of cute. I've watched the show. It's really funny, especially if you're into theater. So that's February 22nd. So we invite all the students out there to be part of that. Then on March 29th, we're going into country music with Adam Ohlendorf. Adam works at the Country Music Hall of Fame, but he has worked with just about every country music artist there is. He is an amazing musician, but also a composer. And he's toured with Casey Musgraves and written music for her. He's performed with Dolly Parton, Willie Nelson, Katy Perry. He's been on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. He's just done it all. And he's just the nicest person too. So again, that's March 29th. So again, if you know a student that's interested in music, doesn't have to be country music, we invite them to join us for that. So with that being said, students, why don't you all turn on your cameras and your mics, and we can give a great round of applause to Jane for participating tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This is really fun.
Well, we loved having you, and boy, it was so insightful.
Was.
So, well,
Thank
thank
you.
you all for joining us, and we hope to see you someday when venues open back up at a live show at the center. Thank you, and good night, everyone.